see.
Ready? We are live and ready to go.
It is 6:01. The commission is now called to order. Take a moment of prayer. Silently, please. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
And I'm going to turn it over to Amber.
Can we have a motion to approve the minutes from the October 20th meeting?
Hello,
So
this
moved.
is Crystal Rouse. Okay, second.
Any discussion?
Yes, I'd like to recuse myself from those minutes since I was unable to attend the last meeting.
Sure, Councilman Griffin. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 The ayes have it. Velvet? Amber?
Okay, so we're going to do the reports from the subcommittees. We're on a tight schedule tonight, guys, so 3 minutes or less. Start with Alvin. Can you give us a report?
Sure. I'll just go through our meetings rather quickly. The Economic Empowerment Subcommittee has met 4 times. We were on a weekly meeting schedule up until last week. We just decided just to break for a week. But basically, first meeting, everybody got together, talked about equity, what that looks like. We tried to define it, and then we came up with some action items, and we're talking about MBEs, participation, what that looks like, incubator spaces, public-private partnerships. Second meeting, we talked about the Opportunity Center and the opportunity to kind of sort of partner with the city. Incubator spaces, Wi-Fi access, business success sector, and conference rooms, basically. So looking at potentially creating a satellite center with the city of Charleston, to kind of sort of help out our Black-owned businesses. And then we ended up generating 4 kind of sort of subcommittees within the subcommittee, focusing on starting a business, access to capital, retaining existing businesses, and government spending. And then, of course, there would be objectives that we would check on to basically just be able to check the progress with the city. Our third meeting, we kind of sort of went outside of the box in our thinking, just kind of sort of just what can we do to kind of sort of help Black-owned businesses, and access to capital was one kind of sort of. So we talked about establishing some type of trust to fund. I think I spoke about this last meeting where we were looking at putting about 20% of internal revenues into this fund, and we will consider partnering with a local-owned Black bank. And then we decided to take a step back. First meeting, we talked about equity, and we realized that we really didn't define what economic empowerment was. We kind of sort of hit the ground running, just kept going. So we kind of took the time to sit back and define what economic empowerment was. So what we came up with was the capacity of individuals to participate in, contribute to, and benefit from growth processes in ways that recognize the value of their contributions, respect their dignity, and make it possible to negotiate a fair distribution of the benefits of growth. So basically, it gives you freedom, control, power, closes gaps, wealth, and also addresses the how. And then we also had a conversation around the International African American Museum and any opportunities that to kind of sort of create a space outside of the museum just for Black-owned businesses, so you can kind of sort of complete the story, right? So you tell the story about 1619. We came over here, we talked about the struggle. So we kind of sort of want to, like, after you finish going through that experience, and you kind of sort of walk into the culmination of that struggle. Like, this is the success, these are our Black businesses, things of that nature. So like I said, we took last week off, and we'll be picking back up tomorrow. So 1 o'clock, anybody can come join. Thank you.
Thank you, Alvin. Tracy, can you give us a report?
May I say something just real quick? This is Councilman Griffin
Yeah.
again.
Yes.
I think that's a really great idea, Alvin. I really like those points, especially about the African American Museum. And one thing that I would love to see, they're going to have a cafe in there. And I would love to see some Gullah cuisine items on the menu there. We don't really have very many Gullah restaurants in this area anymore. And I would love it if we could find a way to do something that honors that heritage in that cafe right there at the African American Museum.
Thank you. Any more comments? Tracy?
Amber, did you ask me to go next?
Yes,
Yeah.
ma'am.
Oh, good. I'm always last. Okay. The Housing and Mobility Committee has been meeting every 2 weeks. And the main items that we have been working on over our last couple of meetings, number one, the passage of a local fair housing ordinance, and Councilmember Gregory and Otha Meadows have been working with us on looking at that, and we've been reviewing the fair housing ordinance that was presented to City Council in 2010. And at that time, there was a proposal for it to be handled by the city, but we will be looking at actually the Trident Urban League administering the program. So if the city passes the fair housing ordinance, then the Trident Urban League would be in a position to be the FAP, or the Fair Housing Assistance, administer the Fair Housing Assistance Program. So we're working on pulling that together, and in the next few weeks, we'll make a recommendation to this commission to move that on to City Council. So we're hoping that this is something that we can move through fairly quickly. Another item that we've spent a good bit of time on is the BAR jurisdiction north of the Septima Clark Parkway. And that was brought to our attention by a group of residents who live in that community. We have been working with the neighborhood groups, the city BAR staff, Historic Charleston Foundation, and others, just discussing the best way to look at this, because there is somewhat of a perception that the folks that are actually purchasing homes in that area and gentrifying the area are the ones that are having the most complaints. And we want to make sure that we are addressing the families that are multi-generational owners, that maybe have heirs properties, and that we're hearing all voices. So we're working to identify the best way to address this and get everybody on the same playing field to bring this forward for a recommendation. And the Historic Charleston Foundation staff is very supportive of looking at those owners that have their homes maybe more than 50 years and maybe some sort of grandfather clause. So we're trying to build some consensus and make sure that we're addressing this in the proper way. We also, was there a question? I'm sorry.
No.
Okay, the other thing we discussed in our last meeting was mobility and transit. And we have several people looking at the projects that the city has in the pipeline, like the low line and the pedestrian bridge, and looking at how these projects, we know they'll have positive impacts, but are there any negative impacts on the Black and brown community? Are they being engaged in the process? You know, looking at the intersection, the intersectionality of the housing and mobility. So the folks on our committee that will be working on this will be coordinating with city staff to come up with some recommendations on that. And then RAD, this is something that we will be discussing at our next meeting, and Melissa is here on the call, and she will be helping us understand the RAD program and looking at, how we're looking at the City of Charleston Housing Authority's plan for implementation of the RAD. And RAD is the Rental Assistance Program under HUD, the redevelopment of public housing. And so we want to look at the public housing that is in the areas, especially that are flooding so badly in our city right now, with contamination in the floodwaters. And I mean, we just feel that that is something that needs to be addressed. So we want to look at how our subcommittee can support and encourage the redevelopment, and look at maybe zoning and how can we facilitate some of these things moving along faster in support of the City of Charleston Housing Authority. So we'll be spending some time next week really digging into that. And then also on our list, are looking at the evictions and foreclosures that we know at the first of the year are going to start hitting and how we can address that. But that's something we still have to put some time into.
Thank you, Tracy. Any questions, comments?
If I could add an editorial comment, there were some good outcomes on Tuesday and some not so, and one of them, in my view, was the fact that the county referendum for affordable housing did not pass. It was really close, like a 51-49 margin, but the newspaper felt like they needed to have a better plan for more support, and I think they can do that. I just mentioned that because this is really a regional problem and not just the City of Charleston. Tracy, sounds like y'all are really digging into a lot of appropriate issues and ways to help address the overall issue of housing. That sounds great. We'll all have to work on next time to get a little more support to that referendum.
Yes, we were all disappointed in that and surprised, actually. That was something that we had discussed.
And Mr. Mayor, this is Dudley. Keith, myself, County Council Woman Johnson, our housing director, we all did sit at the table for a while. And did have some strong recommendations to come up with such a plan. And, part of that was to also show that we had the kind of outreach and marketing for it, so that folks are a bit more knowledgeable about what they're voting for. And hopefully we'll be able to go back to it, but we did have a very, very good meeting, and we had some pretty strong suggestions for Councilwoman Johnson in terms of how she can in fact come up with a plans that are really similar to plans that we have, Mayor, as a city. We didn't want them to reinvent the wheel, but just in terms of time, I don't think it ever really got out there.
Understood.
Okay. Crystal, can you give us your report?
Sure, not a problem. Good evening, everyone. Amber, can you still hear me?
I can.
Okay, great. The Youth and Education Subcommittee met we've been meeting every other Wednesday since our subcommittee was established. We did welcome our newest and youngest committee member, Ms. V.G. Orr, who is a senior at the School of the Arts. We started out the meeting by reviewing common language and definitions as we continue to move this work forward, because we do know and understand that, and excuse me, I'm at a City of Charleston soccer game for my kids. We do know and understand that all of our committees jump straight into the work, but we also understand the importance of taking a step back and making sure that all of us are speaking from the same language and using the same framework as we plan this work out for moving forward. As mentioned during my last report, we broke up into 4 subcommittees: restorative practices, family and community engagement, anti-racism and equity training, and culturally sustaining curriculums. And we're still using the logic model to plan out our work, identify resources, inputs, and outputs. During our last meeting, a lot of our focus was on the restorative practices and what we can do as from the city of Charleston and potentially in conjunction with Charleston County School District. So we're planning that out, and we should have at least that subcommittee logic model completed pretty soon. We also got into discussion as it pertains to, of course, the city of Charleston budget, because we were made aware that, of course, there are budget discussions going on now. And with the special commission, we want to make sure that the special commission is engaged, or at least part of the discussion in regards to the city of Charleston budget moving forward. Because we also want to make sure that we're doing all of this work with intention and not in a performative manner. I'm trying to think what else. Also, our committee, a couple of our committee members, as well as individuals from Felice's committee, the History and Culture Committee, had a chance to meet twice. During our last conversation, we discussed how, their focus is focusing on state historical markers and city markers, and potentially developing a curricula for K through 12 that's project driven and potentially virtual. We discussed different ways for schools to be involved in not only the curriculum process, but also the grant opportunities. And we also brought up the Children's Defense Fund Freedom School program as an impactful way of not only addressing culturally relevant curriculum and culturally sustaining curriculum, but also history and culture. Our next meeting is next week, Thursday at 5:30. That's it for me. Did I stay within the 3 minutes? I hope so.
You did good, Crystal. Thank you. Any questions, comments? Okay, we'll move on to Felice. Can you give us a report?
Yes, I can. Good evening, everyone. So the History and Culture Subcommittee, we have met, I believe, 3 times. And at our very first meeting, we focused on brainstorming. We had a list of questions that Amber and John Mitchell, when he was with the city, provided us with to just talk about what would community engagement look like regarding history and culture. Also, we talked about what would equity look like in our Charleston community in regard to history and culture. Of course, we touched on monuments, memorials, historic sites. What do we currently have? What do we want to see? And we asked the question, how do we continue and maintain current offerings, create new offerings, build momentum for change and growth? Then we established some working committees to address some recommended action items. And we had probably about 5 working committees, but after the wonderful meeting where FOIA guidelines were explained, we realized we had to reduce the size of some of our working committees and make them committees of the whole. The one working committee that still remains intact is the, as a separate working committee, is a committee consisting of 3 individuals who are looking at inventories of state historic markers and city markers. And that's really what we spent our last meeting focused on. We had a robust discussion of the 100 odd state historic markers that exist in our county. Also, we learned that there are over 300, I believe, city markers, and we have a major task ahead of us to go through that inventory. Certainly, it is very clear to our committee that 90 days is not sufficient to give the kind of analysis that is necessary to these markers. And so we know that among our recommendations will be some sort of recommendation considering addressing a sustainable method of going through the inventory and addressing each and every marker, memorial, monument, plaque that is associated with both the state of South Carolina's inventories of state markers and the city of Charleston's inventory. But we're very grateful that both printed and electronic copies of those inventories exist. So that gives us a leg up on our work. We also had a guest presenter, attorney Susan Herdina, legal counsel for the city of Charleston, gave us an overview of the Heritage Act. It was a wonderful overview that helps us just have the proper perspective when it comes to any degree of specificity we're able to get into with specific monuments, markers, and so forth as we move forward with our work. So what is ahead for our committee is at our next meeting, which will be next week, Thursday, we will continue to review and examine state historic markers. Our committee is very diverse and many people have wonderful ideas about additions to add, additional markers to add to the landscape, as well as monuments and memorials. So we're looking forward to hashing out some ideas and being able to present some substantive recommendations, particularly in that area. We will also be calling on some local experts to assist with us in the process, people who are skilled in the history of architecture, city of Charleston history, also Charleston music and culture history, and some of our local tour guides who know Gullah history very well, who can help us identify some additive markers, memorials, and so forth. So that's where we are right now, but we have much more on the agenda moving forward. We're kind of hunkered down in markers right now, but we will return to the issue of, how do we create better use public space to showcase an inclusive history and cultural story about Charleston. So we'll get back to those topics as well.
Thank you, Felice. Any questions, comments? Okay, Michael, can you give us your report?
Yeah, most certainly. And, good evening to everyone, council members, commission members. The Criminal Justice Reform Committee normally meets bi-weekly. We would meet on Mondays at 6 in the evening. Due to, of course, the election, we had to forego our last meeting. It's actually scheduled the 9th of this Monday coming up at 6 p.m. So if you guys are able to be in attendance, we more so than welcome you to that attendance. Our first meeting, an initial meeting, started out with the concerns for policing in the city of Charleston, regards to police engagement from a community standpoint, and of course, the most obvious when it came to protests, rallies, and functions within the community. We looked at engagement from a clarification, not only from a police standpoint, but also from a legal system. Getting a broader perspective of how we want to see that addressed and what manner to prevent what we've seen before in regards to a racial injustice. We've made several partnerships. Wendy Stiver, of course, who's been the Director of Research and Procedural Justice, has been an advocate of everything that we're doing, especially surrounding the audit. Initially, we looked at particular things within that audit, more so around the use of force, as well as traffic stops, reason being behind the traffic stops, and then the percentages around who is being pulled over and for what reason. Wendy has actually created a document in PowerPoint to which she's presented to Chief Reynolds. She has thus forwarded me that email and presentation, to which now we can do a deeper dive into what matters she's addressed in the audit and the resolutions for that. Like has been stated before, We also believe that in regards to the Criminal Justice Reform Committee, that we're going to need a lot more time in regards to the things that we want to see implemented. So like Ms. Knight has stated, one of our most prominent recommendations is going to be to where as though we can unify a lot of the other committees or a lot of the other groups that are doing similar work. CPEC would be one of these groups that have been doing similar work surrounding the audit and surrounding police engagement. Coming up, which is going to be this Monday, we have presentations by Professor Bernard Powers from the College of Charleston. He's going to be giving a 20-minute presentation surrounding the history of policing in Charleston. We'll also have a presentation done by Emily Walters. She's a part of the ACLU. This is much so predicated around reallocations of funds as well as the budget for Charleston Police Department, which is, of course, is a big topic of discussion for the city of Charleston, not just a reallocation of funds, but exactly what the funding is currently in regards to the budget. And of course, Councilman Sacrin, as I can attest to that, as we spoke in the email surrounding her ideas and her concerns. Our subcommittee has also been broken down into 3 major groups surrounding the racial bias audit, the ordinances, as well as courts. A lot of that work in regards to the ordinances and courts is going to be spearheaded by Arthur McFarland and Ali Menegakis. They'll be surrounding once again, the courts and the ordinances. We'll be going over those discussions come Monday. So at that point, we can pull what we want from those processes. And when we present that, it's going to come from those 3 clusters. And lastly, of course, is actually unifying, like I just stated before, the other groups here, because I've noticed that in regards to or at least my vice chair, Jerry Harris, he's also a part of CPEC. So now to ensure that we're not stepping on each other's toes, we're not going to bridge those gaps because they've also already been working on like traffic stops, use of force, policies and procedures, and a lot of gray areas that we've seen. Just to give you an example of which, when a responding officer identifies a threat, how he's supposed to respond. In many cases, as far as how that's documented, it's classified in other if he's not pulling his weapon. So our indication is to identify how that could be specifically identified to where so we can prevent those, interactions moving forward that could have easily been prevented, especially in the idea of systemic racism. And like I said, these are going to be a lot of the talking points and working points that we're going to have going forward. After our next meeting, which is Monday, we'll then have a proposal or a strong proposal to which we plan on putting forward in our next commission meeting.
Thank you, Michael. And last but not least, John, do you have an update for us?
Briefly, yes. Good evening, everybody. It's good to see you all's faces. It's been a little while. I am happy to report that I am here today because our dear friend, Mr. Darren Calhoun II, has welcomed his daughter. So congratulations to Seven. Her born day was just a week and a half ago or so. So congrats to him and his lovely fiance. Briefly to report, we were set to meet last week, but that was right upon the time of Seven's arrival, so we did not meet. And then our next scheduled meeting is on Veterans Day. So I'm sending out a doodle with the link to this meeting that we are in right now for my team to review and get back to us so that Amber can have that update tomorrow morning as to when we will be meeting next week. And just to give you an update as to what we've been doing, that we've already met twice already. And the continuation is that the work groups that have been predefined for our subcommittee, which are around procurement processes, the planning and zoning efforts, as well as hiring and training efforts. Those groups have been meeting with city staff to figure out how to better bolster what we can put forward as a recommendation. And we're also looking at how we can better partner and bridge those gaps, just as Mr. Better had mentioned, with the other groups that have similar minded focuses across our 3 subgroup areas. So I will give you back the gift of time, Amber, and try to get us back on some sense of schedule. And, you know, again, like I said, happy to see you all and very excited to continue in the work.
Thank you, John. That was great. So now I will introduce you all to Dr. Sharissa Owens. She is the Director of Diversity Education and Training, and she will do a presentation for us.
Hey, good evening, everyone. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Well, how are you guys doing this evening?
Incredible.
Doing well.
Great.
I see some friendly faces, I know, so this is going to be nice. I am, like as Amber mentioned before, I am the Director of Diversity Education and Training in the Office of Institutional Diversity. We oftentimes go out into the community to support any efforts in diversity, equity, and inclusion. So this is one of those opportunities. On this particular training, I have one of my dear friends and partner. Her name is Linda Keller. Linda, I'll have you introduce yourself.
Hi, it's good to see all of you tonight. My name is Linda Keller. I am the Assistant Director in Multicultural Student Programs and Services at the College of Charleston. And Dr. Owens and I frequently partner to do these kind of things. I'm also the Safe Zone Committee trainer at the college. So thank you for having us tonight.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. As I was listening to everyone's reports, what we're going to cover tonight for some of you guys will be a review, for others it'll be something that's going to be new and others deeper. So I will go ahead and get started. Now I'm going to ask if I can have access to sharing my screen. Oh, I see it. It's already there. All right. So let me bring it on up. Just give me a quick moment. There you go. All right, everyone. You guys can see that, correct? Make it a little bit bigger for you. All right. Well, at the College of Charleston, we've been charged with a great deal of training for our faculty, staff, and students, and it has been done in a 4-part series called DEEP, which is Department Equity Education Program. Tonight, that first session has been customized to fit what you guys are doing in the city, and specifically in regards to the work you are trying to conjure up in order to produce an action plan. So Linda and I, we worked on this particular training just so that it'll fit not only the work that you're doing, but also your different roles in our community. Okay, so we are going to go back and look at the ABCs of systemic awareness. And we just did a quick welcome and overview. I would like to introduce you guys on what to expect in this session. Each bullet is considered a module. So I'm gonna read it aloud as you read with me. The very first bullet reads as, you guys as participants in tonight's training will review common language to reinforce a focus on the creation of measurable outcomes, promotion of greater accountability, and coordination of community-wide efforts to achieve racial equity in our community. So you guys are already working towards that. And I believe one of the committee members said you're just trying to get around coming together on those key terms. Well, hopefully tonight you will have a resource to use to move you guys forward in an agreement with the terminology. We are also going to go ahead and cover the legacy of systemic oppression from the standpoint, of course, race, which is a very, very prominent issue, but also from the standpoint of its intersections with other marginalized identities, such as sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender, okay? And then at the very end, we're going to hit that last module where you guys are going to have an opportunity to literally brainstorm some of the best practices that we're going to cover in today's training. Now, as I said before, some of this might be a review for you guys. For some others, it might be deeper. Others, it may be something that you're very familiar with, which is right on target. We just want to make sure that everybody is on the same page as they move forward in creating the work that you want to have submitted in the time frame that you guys have. So as we move into our content, I would like to let you guys know that there are going to be a couple of opportunities where you will share in discussion. Those opportunities are going to be I'll open to you guys to put into chat if you feel comfortable. Of course, with chat, you know it is going to be assigned to your name. If not, you guys will also be able to post in what is called Padlet. And that'll be a link provided to you guys where you can post those comments, thoughts, and questions in a way that allows you to be a little bit more open, honest, authentic, and in some cases, more vulnerable, okay? So let's get into what our guidelines are. So I know many of you guys have already kind of looked at those in advance. I'm gonna go ahead and share with you guys what those brave space guidelines are in our chat room. I want you guys, if you haven't had a chance, to just take a quick look at it. And let me make sure I can, oh, I cannot add a file. Let's see. Amber, is there any way I can get permission to add a file?
Velvet, can you make her a co-host? There you go.
There we go. Thank you. All right. So let me go ahead and upload that file for you. It says it's still only giving me an opportunity to chat, not to share. Okay, if we don't have the opportunity to share, no worries. I have an alternative way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to escape. Let me go ahead and get out of that. I'm going to stop sharing for now. And I'm going to go ahead and share with you guys my screen that shows those guidelines. Okay, so just give me one quick moment. I'll bring it up. All right. All right, guys, can you see that? Just give me a quick thumbs up that you guys can see that. I will go ahead and make it the full screen. All right, so as a full screen, what I'm going to do is shrink it just a little bit so you guys can see all 10. If it's hard for you to see, I do apologize. This is just a modification that I wanted to add so that everybody can see it. All right, I'm gonna give you guys about 30 seconds to about a minute or so to read through those 10 guidelines, and more specifically, think in your mind as you're reading, how can you practice that during tonight's training?
Can you make it any bigger?
I can. Now, if I make it bigger, I'm gonna have to scroll down a little bit later, okay?
That's okay. Perfect.
Okay, I'll stop at, number 6, and then let me know when you guys are ready for me to scroll down.
Okay. Okay.
All right, let's scroll up to 4, 7, 8, 9, and 10. All right, my friends. So if you guys have looked through those 10, I'm going to have you guys, again, take a moment and think about which one would you want to actually practice in tonight's session. All 10 can definitely be put into practice, but I would love for you guys to focus on one. If you choose to focus on one and feel comfortable enough, please post in the chat the number of the guideline that you would like to try to practice tonight. Okay, I see number 9, number 7, 7. I see 8, 4. Okay. Let's see, number 5. Okay. Well, as you guys look at these, they're all very strong practices, especially when it comes to dialogue for challenging, if not very critical conversations around race. Here's the thing. We're going to be having these kinds of conversations, so we are going to encourage you to practice these. Tonight, we're going to actually put a focus on one in particular, which is number 1. Linda and I have done this a great deal. Number 8, right, Linda? Challenging with care. All right. Now, challenging with care will look a little different based on how you self-identify. But I want you to understand that in this space, we have to be able to not just actively listen and step back. These are all very much important. But I think where the conflict often occurs is how do we challenge each other with care so that we can move forward in our discussions to focus on the charge at hand. All right. Now, I want you guys just to take a moment and give me a second while I switch out my screen so that you guys can move into the next part of what does it look like to challenge with care based on how you self-identify. Right. Okay. Let's make that bigger. All right. So everybody can see that, right? Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful.
Yes.
Okay, so now challenging with care is going to look different, like I said a little bit before, about based on how you self-identify. If you self-identify as Black, Indigenous, or a person of color, or BIPOC, all right, your challenging with care is going to literally be a few simple steps. Keep in mind, you're challenging yourself in a space where oftentimes we have not been given an opportunity or even the security to speak what is authentic to our encounters, to our community. So as you're speaking and challenging yourself to speak up, I want you first and foremost to breathe through this. It's not going to be easy, but you need to breathe through it because sometimes it does bring up a great deal of tension mentally, emotionally, and physically. So I want you to take a moment to breathe before you speak. All right. The next one would be for you to speak honestly about racism, its intersections, especially its intersections with other forms of discrimination, whether it's your gender, your sexual orientation, your gender identity, or sexual orientation, I apologize, so on and so forth. Okay. You got to make sure that we stay focused on race, but also understand how race intersects with all these different identities so that we can address the broader population of individuals who have been marginalized historically for far too long. Of course, you guys hit on this one, actively listening. So as you listen to each other, again, breathe through, work to find the connection in what that person is saying. And if it's something that you have not experienced, if it is something that you may not have knowledge about, if it is something that you have yet to ever encounter, give them the benefit of doubt and let them know that it is a valid statement. Period. There's no need to invalidate one another as much as it is to hear one another. And then the last one is as you are going through this process, keep in mind, you're actively listening, you're doing all this conscious work. I want you to ask the questions in your mind before you actually speak out. One, the idea that you have in your mind that you want to share, where did the idea come from? It's important that you ask that question because you want to know how idea actually manifested itself into what you understand as important or valid for the conversation, okay? The next one is why is that idea challenging for me? If it's an idea that challenges, why? Is it the way you were brought up? Is it the media? Is it a historical experience that has been passed down genetically or, not genetically, I apologize, generationally, right? And then the last one is, does the idea actually inhibit or foster inclusivity? I'm a big, big advocate of understanding that there's going to be ideas that are going to be harmful when it comes to our overarching goal of achieving inclusivity and equity. So always ask this question, is this particular idea, thought, going to move us in that direction of fostering inclusivity and equity? If not, you may want to go back through that process of reflection breathing so that everybody else gets a chance to make sure that we are staying focused on that overarching goal. So far, so good? Questions, thoughts, and comments before I move on to the next area when it comes to challenging with care. Awesome sauce. Okay. So let's move on to our next slide. Challenging with care, you self-identify white or of European descent. Your challenge with care, of course, is starting with yourself. Keep in mind that this is going to probably be very, very challenging for you in some cases. So I want you, like I said, for those who are identified Black, Indigenous, or a person of color, to breathe through it. Breathing relieves a lot of the tension that we encounter when we have these conversations, and it inhibits us from moving forward. All right. The next one is to actively listen to Black, Indigenous, people of color. You guys already have this. I am just reiterating how valuable it is. Right. The next one is to minimize your defensiveness. This will manifest in so many different ways, whether it is a need to cry, if it's a need to shut off, if it's a need to get up and walk away, if it's a need to interrupt, if it's a need to validate or quote unquote make things more objective, okay? It is part of your defensive mechanism because you are now experiencing what is called racial stress, which is new because of the environments that we are in right now. I want you to minimize it, meaning acknowledge that it's there, but do not allow it to become the center of attention in such an important discussion, because then it will now become co-opting the conversation or the opportunity to focus on comforting you instead of addressing the topics and the charge at hand. Okay. The last one, the next to last, is to demonstrate humility and curiosity. Ask questions. It's okay if you mess up. I promise you, we will provide care when it comes to using the right language or even helping to understand how that might be harmful. But the humility part is accepting that our history has been a very humiliating encounter for so many. And so to exemplify humility while you are in this particular training tonight will help everybody get a better understanding of why we're doing what we're doing without the need to make people feel comfortable who do not need to feel comfortable in this moment. If you're self-identifying white at this particular time, your comfort is not the focus. The comfort is not the focus. It is us going into the discomfort, leaning into that discomfort so that we can get these changes done for those individuals who are in the Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities to start to feel more comfortable in the spaces that they are in every single day. Last thing, I want you guys to reflect on those same things that I mentioned a little bit earlier. Where did that idea come from before you speak on it? Why is that idea a challenge for yourself? And again, does that idea inhibit or foster inclusivity? All right. I've taken up.
Doctor,
yeah.
I'm sorry, Dr. Owens. I'm so glad that you said, as it relates to minimize defensiveness, it's about leaning into that discomfort. Because as I was listening to you, I kept thinking that's one of those brave guidelines. So oftentimes we have to do that. If you identify as white, when you're in a group, you have to lean into that discomfort. When you have somebody who is a person of color who's sharing their experience with you, it can become uncomfortable. So you have to lean into that, and you have to listen. So I'm so glad that you brought that into focus, because I think that's really important for us to keep in mind as we move through.
Yes, thank you, Linda. I was going to pass the mic on to you. See, we already in sync. We already got that. We got it. All right. So let's go ahead and move on to the actual meat of today. Again, I'll give you guys another 30 seconds. If there's any questions, comments, or thoughts about what it means to challenge with care, starting with yourself based on how you identify, and then moving into these very challenging but necessary conversations. Okay, let's move on into it. So here's one of my favorite cartoons. I know it may be a little blurry, but I want you to read it with me, okay? Because oftentimes we forget, and I'm one of them, so I'm putting myself in this group. So as I read it aloud, I would like for you to read it in your minds, all right? No matter how open-minded, socially conscious, anti-racist I think I am, I still have old, learned, hidden biases that I, myself, need to examine. It is my responsibility, not someone else's, to check myself daily, actually in some cases moment by moment, for my stereotypes, prejudice, and ultimately discrimination. That is what we're going to be practicing tonight, that we check ourselves so that we can have the conversations that are necessary to move us into the actions that are required for our community's changes. All right? All right. So let's move in. Linda, is there anything else you wanted to add before we get into the content or the meat of tonight?
Yep, I think you got it. Thank you.
Yep. All right. So like I mentioned a little bit earlier, we have those 3 modules that we're going to cover tonight. The 3 modules, I'm just going to reiterate what they are going to be covering. The very first one is that common language. You guys are going to go have an opportunity to get those definitions and solidify them as a group of what does that mean for you guys. We're going to go into the language when it comes to systemic awareness, particularly with race and intersections with other identities. And then you guys go straight into brainstorming, literally giving you guys a space to dream, to write, to think, to just even reflect, and then post ideas that you can move on a little bit later. And particularly keeping in mind, how do you guys move forward even as a unit, so that one young man, I believe it was Michael, who said that you don't step on each other's toes. You want to learn and be intentional and working in unison so that the outcomes are multiplied, if not magnified. I can go a whole lot more with synonyms, but I won't do that tonight. Okay. So our common language, right? So when it comes to the common language, there is a plethora of research when it comes to definitions and what means what and what's the right acronym now, so on and so forth, right? I'm going to show you guys in just a moment. I'm going to see if I can put it in our chat. Let's see if it'll let me do it. I'm going to put in chat in just a moment the link to our Padlet where you guys are going to take a jab, meaning come up and draw up your own definitions for those vocabulary words. Those vocabulary words will be race, equity, intersectionality, gender identity, sexual orientation. Take your best shot at giving us a definition that you think fits that vocabulary word. Now, as you post, keep in mind it should be anonymous, and I cannot get this thing to show me my links. So give me 1 second. I'm so much smoother at this usually. There we go. All right, so I'm gonna share. Come on. Put it in post. Post it. Boom. All right, my friends, you guys go ahead and click on that particular link. I will give you guys as individuals approximately 5 minutes to jot down your definitions. Now, all you really have to do is click on the plus sign for a new column and just to type it right on in. And as you are typing, it will keep you guys anonymous. So please take the time to draft out those definitions, make mistakes. It is perfectly okay. Your 5 minutes will begin now. All right, I am monitoring what you guys are posting, which looks absolutely fantastic. Keep it up. Just giving you guys a 2-minute warning. I give you guys a heads up. If you scroll your screen left and right, you will see the last 2 vocabulary words, which is sexual orientation and equality, just in case you may have not been able to see them before. You guys are doing so exceptionally well. You guys are on it, actually. All right, about 30 more seconds. Okay. So I am, like I said, I'm just taking a moment to look at your post. Linda, do you notice anything or you have any thoughts about what you're seeing?
I do want to comment on a couple related to gender identity and sexual orientation. So under gender identity, someone wrote in the gender one identifies with. It can be different from the gender one was assigned at birth. And that really does hit the nail right on the head, right? Somebody typed in how folks identify sexual identity, both of themselves and others. I would encourage you to think about how you identify others, because it's not really our responsibility to tell someone else how they identify how they might identify their own gender. So, and I know that for some that may be a different kind of concept to grasp, but you may look at me and say, well, you're obviously a woman, but that might not be how I identify. I may say I'm gender nonconforming. So it really is not up to others. So I want to that's my safe zone training coming out. So I want to take the opportunity to have you think about that. Because when you talk about gender, that might not be the gender you were assigned at birth when the doctor handed you over to your parents. The other one is sexual orientation. So when you think about sexual orientation, that's who you are sexually attracted to. That's who you want to have a romantic or sexual relationship with. I would encourage you to steer away from saying preference. I prefer red wine to white. So I would encourage you to stay away from, when you're talking about sexual orientation, to steer away from saying preference. You guys are digging in deep, and it's exciting to see that. But those are some things that I might encourage you to think about moving forward. I think really when you are working with folks in the LGBTQ community, and you're talking about sexual orientation, preference is something that people would probably find offensive. So I want to encourage you to just say sexual orientation, but good work on those for the most part.
Absolutely. Thank you, Linda. Now, you're probably wondering, why are we talking about all these different words? There's other words that we could definitely have chosen, but you got to keep in mind that when we're speaking particularly about race, that race is just one lens in which someone is identified as, or how they identify themselves. There are other identities that make what one person may experience either much more difficult or less difficult based on other socially constructed identities, such as the gender identity, sexual orientation. It makes having access to equality more challenging, right? It can make access to equity more challenging. So it's important that we start to look at race as not just the only, but as one of many, so that we can really get into what our larger community, our much broader community needs, based on the multiple identities that we have, or the intersecting identities that we all have, right? So it is, as we move forward, I want you guys, and I'm going to share with you in just a moment, to look at some of the research. And again, this is not comprehensive. This is just easier to digest. I've even simplified it even more. If you want to go into the depths of the research, it is a clickable file where you can find the research and look it up on your own. So I'm going to share with you guys on the screen. Let's see. There's share, new share. I found that I would share with you guys an email a little bit later, okay? I literally created it just for you after doing some more homework on what it means to work in our community when we're trying to strive for what is now termed or coined inclusive excellence, right? This is our community's mantra, is in what we're trying to do right now in this very moment, is to actually to personify, to quantify, if not even become the model of inclusive excellence, and specifically in a historic community, right? So I'm going to read the very first one, as you guys read with me in your own minds. Can everybody see that? I want to make sure everybody can see that. You guys are good? Okay, I'm going to make it as large as I can because I know I'm sharing it, all right? So the very first one is inclusive excellence. And so this really calls for a deep, not just superficial, understanding of equity, its role in society, and its impact on the possibilities we pass on to the next generation. Okay? It requires using the cultural capital and talents of marginalized populations for the benefit of building a sustainable, diverse learning community. That is what those action plans are going to manifest into. So as we're considering those action points, and as you guys are brainstorming, you're working on your different committees, this is what we are striving to become, inclusively excellent in the city of Charleston. Okay? So you guys may have heard diversity. It is a catch-all word, but I would love for you guys just to take a minute and understand that diversity is much broader than inclusion and equity, right? So diversity includes those two, but it's absolutely much broader. And what I have here is actually from a pretty classic article. So I'm gonna read it again out loud as you guys read with me in your minds. Diversity is where individual differences, their demeanor, prior knowledge, and life experiences, and group or societal or social differences, examples such as race, ethnicity, class, gender, sexual orientation, country of origin, ability, as well as cultural, political, religious, and other affiliations, are respected so everyone is able to recognize, realize the intellectual and personal potential as members of a much global-oriented and diverse community. So as you, again, remember we talked about race and we said, how does it intersect? How does it overlap with other identities? Here in this definition, you start to understand how these different definitions manifest, identities manifest. Sexual orientation, country of origin, one's abilities such as disability, right? Then tie that to cultural, political, religious, and other affiliations. It really magnifies one's risk for harms. And it even magnifies one's trauma being raised or being brought up in communities that are very, very insular in their frameworks. All right. So again, as you move into these next steps, challenge yourself to see race as a priority, but also how does it intersect with these other ones? Because that is really making a step in the direction of embracing diversity, which is moving us towards inclusive excellence. Questions before I move on? Give you guys 30 seconds. Okay, awesome possum. So actually that wasn't 30, that was 15 seconds. Give me, I'll get that a little bit later. All right, so next one was race, right? I'm a big fan of the National Museum of African American History and Culture. They have so much resources for everybody to use. So I took this from their site and from their resources. So race for them is defined as which is created to classify individuals on an arbitrary basis of skin color, right? That caste system. If anybody's read Isabel Wilkerson, that's definitely what she's referring to. Race is a socially fabricated caste system with no genetic or scientific basis to establish and justify power systems, privilege, and oppression worldwide. So we got to understand that this was socially constructed. If you really think about it, we are really fighting to make us more unified as a human race, so that individuals, based on the amount of melanin in their skin, can have equal power, privilege, so that they can move into next levels of access, achievements, success, so on and so forth. So far, so good? Okay. Next one, ethnicity. Now, you'll see that oftentimes like either or, right? It's because they're both socially constructed, right? And so it's predicated on the concept of race. Ethnicity is a place, time, and context-specific fabricated construct referring to individuals belonging to a social group whose characteristics, such as culture and nativity, and relation defines one's place within a social hierarchy. So immediately being attached to ethnicity, particularly in a space, for example, here in the United States, if you're a minority, powers and privileges that are assigned to the majority are not given to the minority. You understand where that's going, right? Go to another part of the world that may flip, right? So I'll give you an example. My family's from the West Indies. I have a great deal more leverage in the West Indies being a dark-skinned sister with hair who's natural than someone else who looks completely different, right? It's the power and privilege. It really is space-specific, place-specific, and time-specific and context, okay? The next one is gender identity. We kind of, Linda hit on that. Linda, would you want to read that one for me, love?
Gender identity. So Dr. Owens got this from the Alliance for Full Acceptance. So a deeply held core sense of being a girl or a woman or boy or man, some of both or neither, may not always correspond to a person's biological sex. Awareness of gender identity is usually experienced as early as 18 months old.
Right. Thank you, Lynn. I know I just threw you out there. I apologize. I just was thirsty.
It's why I'm here, to be abused.
Yes. So we got to understand that this starts out so early. Whether the individual recognizes it or not at that particular age, it starts to they start to experience that. So you want to understand that this is a great resource. Their organization here in South Carolina is another great resource to connect with and build a partnership as you move forward into the work that you guys are doing. Okay, I'll read gender expression and I got it. So Alliance for a Full Acceptance, yet again, the conscious or subconscious manner in which one communicates about gender to others, just as Linda was saying a little bit earlier, how they communicate gender to others through external means such as their clothing, appearance, mannerisms. An individual's gender expression does not automatically imply one's gender identity. Okay, so we got to get a broader understanding, because if we're talking about our brothers and sisters who are indigenous and other people of color, and we're wanting to make sure that race is a prominent feature, where we can't leave out those indigenous people who self-identify as maybe two-spirit, right? So you want to make sure that these people feel that the work that you are doing also speaks to them, and that we are not perpetrating the same insular framework that we have been a part of for too long. Okay? Sexual orientation, this one came from the Human Rights Campaign, and like I said, these are all clickable. So if you, once I show this out, you can click on it and it'll take you right there. All right? Sexual orientation is an inherent or immutable, enduring emotional, romantic, or sexual attraction to other people, where the attraction helps determine orientation. Again, who do you want to have an affectionate, romantic relationship with, right? Again, we want to make sure race is in there, but how does this all play into those other identities? Sexual orientation is definitely one of them. And you guys know, we just kept talking intersectionality, intersectionality, intersectionality. There's a number of great videos. One of my favorite ones is actually created by, again, the National Museum for African American Culture, History and Culture. It's featured in the Smithsonian Magazine. And it actually speaks to Kimberly Crenshaw's definition, where the practice of ensuring opportunities are created for historically marginalized populations so that they may have equal access to resources proven capable of reducing or eliminating the impact of systemic and methodic inequalities experienced by historically marginalized populations. So we're going to go back to intersectionality, those identities that overlap. But here's the thing. You want to make sure that the actions that you guys are going to propose connect to resources that are proven to reduce, if not eliminate, the impact of these problems, right? So connecting with other groups, civic groups, businesses, so on and so forth, that's where that broadness of knowledge will come in to help define what that would look like for your next steps. So we got equality, all right? Now I got this one from the United Nations. Okay, so equality is defined as the enacted belief that each individual has the right to realize one's full potential, yet again, full potential, and is supported in their professional and personal development to reach higher levels of success. Okay, the right. Bottom line, it doesn't matter their gender, it doesn't matter their race, it doesn't matter their sexual orientation. It is a human right for equality. So far, so good with this? Okay. I promise you guys are going to talk. I promise. I'm just trying to get all the content out, okay? And equity, right? I got this from the, oh, so sorry. Window closed. I don't know why that happened. Let me bring it back up. That was odd. Sorry about that, guys. All right, we're back on. We're back on. Let's go on down. All right, so as I was speaking a little bit earlier, so equity, which is different. Whoops, come on, act right. Okay, so we talked about equality. Come on now. Okay, I guess I gotta be nice to my computer since it is my source of training for this evening. All right, so with equity, right, there's a major difference between equity and equality. And in equity, you want to take a look at ensuring that opportunities are actually created to make things equal. That's the difference, okay? So equity is actually the practice of ensuring that these opportunities are created for historically marginalized populations have equal access to those proven resources, okay? So it is important that equity is the practice of ensuring everyone has access, no matter what disadvantages they may have in the system that is present. We want to make sure that those systems are not going to limit an individual's opportunity to be considered equal in performance, in action, in expectations, so on and so forth. Okay? All right. Last one, promise, is inclusion. All right. And this one came from the American Association of Colleges and Universities. Inclusion is defined as the active, intentional, and ongoing engagement in broadening opportunities that increase awareness, content knowledge, cognitive sophistication, and empathetic understanding of the complex ways individuals in a diverse community live, work, and learn within systems and institutions. So this is what you guys are moving forward, right? This is why we broke things down by vocabulary, because we want you guys to understand diversity and inclusion are not just big hot topic or words for the moment as much as it is purposeful, strategic action steps, where we are making sure that we are not going to follow in the footsteps of the past of maintaining an insular way of thinking, but making sure that we are broadening what we're doing so that as many of our brothers and sisters who are coming from different marginalized communities feel that this is responding to them as well.
So, Dr. Owens, I want to talk just a second about equality and equity. Sometimes when Dr. Owens and I do this training, she uses a drawing or a cartoon where there's a baseball game going on and there's a fence and there's a child looking over the fence. He's tall enough to see over, and there are other children with him. Some of you give me a thumbs up if you've seen that cartoon. Right. So equality would be, well, you give every child the same box, but that may not be enough for that child to see over the fence. Equity would be giving each child what they need to be able to see over the fence. For one, it might be 2 boxes. For one, it might be a ramp because they're in a wheelchair and they need a ramp to get up high enough to see. So sometimes I'm more of a visual learner and that helps me a little bit. So if you'll think about that, that's the difference between equality and equity, because I think sometimes folks will get those two, folks use those words interchangeably, and they really do mean very different things. Equality is giving everybody the exact same thing, and that's not always what is going to lead to equity. Dr. Owens might need something a little bit different than me, and I might need something a little bit different than her to be successful in a math class. But we both have the ability to be successful. We just need different supports. So you might want to visualize it like that. So the difference between equality and equity, those are 2 different words. Well said.
And I love that image. I just did not use it tonight for some strange reason. It did not come to mind. All right, my lovelies. So what I'm going to have you guys do right now, go back to that Padlet, take a look at the post that you made and see if there's anything you want to change, to update based on what we've covered so far when it comes to the terminology. I'll give you guys another 3 minutes to do that. Now, I will give you guys some grace. If you don't remember which post is yours, it's okay. Go ahead and add to the section that you will want to revise that definition for yourself. All right, my friends, give you guys one more minute. One more minute. And in this minute, if you would like to kind of get up and stretch, feel free to do so. You guys have been sitting down for a while, so kind of get that blood flowing. I'm used to sitting down for 3 hours at a time.
Check your phone to see if any of the election results are in.
Right. All right, my friends. Go ahead. You still have a little bit more time. I'm just going to talk, let you guys know that what you guys created in this particular Padlet, what I would do is part of the follow-up. I would download this and send this to you guys. I send this to Amber so she can distribute, so that you guys can look back at this and see what definitions you guys want to agree on. And I'm gonna send it in addition to that I guess infographic with those definitions. Okay, so you'll have something to refer to as you continue the discussions with the language and vocabulary. All right, my friends. So what I'm going to do, I am going to move into our next part, our next module. Keep in mind, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, the value of the language, specifically in the work that you guys are doing, it allows you guys to not become distracted on defining. As long as you have an agreement and you can move on to the larger goal, focus on that. And it also provides a great deal of clarity. But more importantly, it leads to significant long-lasting improvements, because as a unit, you guys are all going to be using the language that can go interchangeably between the different committees, which is really, really important as you guys move into an action plan that is going to overlap, obviously, in some spaces. Okay? Okay. All right, we've done that. You did that. You did that. All right. So the legacy of systemic oppression. You guys are ready for this one? Whew. All right. I refilled my water bottle, so I'm good. I'm good. Okay. So systemic oppression, I'm going to have those three up there, and I'm just going to read through in just a moment, but you are more than welcome to read on your own. You got to understand, systemic oppression was built to do what it's doing right now. Okay? So understanding that this is historically, methodically built to oppress, and particularly oppress and mistreat people of color or people who identify based on different marginalized identities. This is something that cannot be done overnight. It is going to take a great deal of exercise in one's mind and one's emotional prowess to get through what we have to get through to undo what history has created. Okay? So systemic oppression, the very first one I just kind of touched on, is that it is a historic occurrence, a historic and methodical occurrence of oppression, right, or mistreatment, whether it's intentional or unintentional. Okay? So, hold on. Oh, got it. So, whoops, I am so sorry. I'm clicking all over my doggone computer. So you want to make sure that we acknowledge the history, and I believe you guys already are starting to. But here's the thing. As we see it in the history, we understand that it works from in our past. It has continued to be an ever-present, also ever-evolving. When you're creating these action plans, you have to start thinking foresight. What would this evolve into that we have seen a pattern in our history? You got to be able to do that. Otherwise, it can stall if you're not preparing for its evolution. That is why it has been able to withstand time. You got to start looking beyond the now. Look into the future. So having younger generations a part of these conversations is very key to that. Okay? Of course, we also know, some of you guys understand this, that it exists across multiple levels of society, institutional, structural, right? You got the policies and practices. It goes across the structures of education, health, transportation, and economy. You understand it's multi-level and multi-levers, right? It's another form of intersection. So if you have the foresight, keep that foresight of how this intersects so that as you move forward those action plans, those ideas, that the work will continue to intersect both of those, the levels of institutions and the structures. Ms. Najim, I saw your hand. Go ahead. What questions do you have?
I just wanted to inquire or offer the idea of the invisible backpack. I hear what you're saying, and this is new for me, to look into the future as far as dismantling systemic oppression. But it's difficult to dismantle something that people don't see or recognize. So at one point, to me, this was explained as the idea of an invisible backpack that a person in power or a person of the majority, whatever that might be, whether that be gender or race, that they wear, that they might not be aware of, that they have, and it allows them to move through life or situations with more ease.
I love that.
Najima, thank you. I've actually done like several years ago a little workshop using that model. And what you're talking about is having people look deeply at what their privilege is. What are those things that we didn't necessarily have to earn that give us privilege to move through the world more at ease than other people. So it kind of gets away, trying to get away from that pull yourself up by the bootstraps mentality, and because that assumes that there's equity for everyone, which isn't really true. So what you're talking about is looking at what your privileges are, and that gives you a starting point to look at the world from how other people have to navigate. And there are all kinds of things out there on the web where you can do these little quizzes. It's like, what are your privileges? Did you come from a home where you had two parents living at home? Are you white? Are you male? Are you Christian? Are you able-bodied? Do you have a mental illness or not? There are all kinds of things that aren't just necessarily about skin color, but the privileges that you have, load up that backpack, that invisible backpack. That's awesome. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, and that's the first time I've heard of it, so that's pretty awesome. I love that, and I'm going to use it. So I'm going to kind of tag on your ear a little bit later to get that from you. All right, but yes, you're spot on. But here's the thing, with that backpack that we have, okay, The idea is, as you're planning, you got to plan for a future again, so that we don't reinscribe what our past has continued to do over and over again, right? We want to make sure that what we see as levels of power and privilege given to one group is not just shifted to another group. We want to make sure it is shifted to the population in itself in balance, okay? And of course, you guys know this. The discussions on this stuff is really, really accompanied by strong emotions. So I know as I'm talking, sometimes I come across passionately or strong-willed, or really, what's one of my favorite ones? Intense. That was a nice word. Intense. It's okay that it is there, all right? Because it is oftentimes attached to an experience and an encounter. It's a passion for somebody. This is really important to understand, that emotions will be a part of this. It is not going to be objective. To expect this work to be objective is absolutely, what's a nice word to say? Inappropriate. Okay? It's going to be subjective, because the entire system was set up in subjectivity. All right. So as you move into these discussions, it's really a great way to have these awareness is knowing that you're going to have these emotions, but also have some guidelines on how to navigate through it. Have some strategies in place to work through those strong emotions, so it does not take away from the charge that you guys are working on. Okay. Next one. Oops. Sorry. Next 4. With systemic oppression, we also understand that implicit bias and prejudice are learned, but more importantly, can be unlearned. We hear it all the time that somebody has a bias, but we do not often give credit to the ability for that individual to unlearn it and give them the space to do so. Right? We have given ourselves a very insular way of thinking when it comes to bias and prejudice. We ourselves need to unlearn some of the things that we were taught, and that takes grace, it takes time, that takes patience. So make sure as you're moving forward that you are extending yourself that grace, that patience, that time to unlearn, and then extend that to others. Okay? Oppression and injustice are human creations and phenomena, and therefore can be undone, which is the most powerful, if not the more impressive. That's why you guys are doing what you're doing. You know that already, right? How is it going to be undone? It starts within yourself. Linda and I mention this all the time. The work that we are doing takes a great toll on one's mental, emotional, in some cases, physical capacity. It is just as important that, 1, you allow space to examine your own biases, your own feelings, your own experiences, and bring that to the table. 2, take care of yourself. Take care of yourself. This stuff will wear you out if you don't put in the time or set aside activities where you are re-energizing yourself. My goodness, not just re-energizing, Linda, what's the word I'm looking for? I can't think of it right now. It just went out of my brain.
Rejuvenating.
Regenerate, make yourself balanced. I can't even, my mind is blank for a moment. Thank you.
Well, to recharge,
That's it.
To recharge, yeah.
That's the word I was looking for, to recharge, right? When Martin Luther King did this work, he was very conscious of the toll this takes on not just himself, but also of those in it. And part of his 4-part plan right before direct action was to take a moment to care for yourselves. Training was a part of it, but also reflection. So as you're moving through this work, even in your teams, allow space for people to debrief, to reflect, to recharge.
To breathe,
absolutely. Through this. I'm a big fan of getting my pedicures done so that I can breathe through this, right? All right, next one. Manifest in economic, of course, you guys know this. It manifests in economic, social, political, and cultural systems. You guys know that already. Got it. But let's go back to how these are also interconnected and reinforced over time. You don't want to continue in reinforcing this. That is why tonight we talked about broadening the work that you're doing. So we'll take it into consideration as many of those marginalized communities as possible, so that we do not become a shift of power from one group to another, but a shift in power among a group of people where it is more balanced. Okay, got a chat. What's up? Sign off, okay? All right, thank you, Mayor Tecklenburg. See you later. All right, so keeping that in mind, let's focus on the fact that you guys are already working on undoing systemic oppression, right? Here are some of the best practices. One, recognition of inequitable patterns. If you can recognize these historic patterns, you can, one, undo them and make sure the action plans as you move forward will not reinscribe them. Keep that in mind. You're planning for a future that is unseen, so allow it to have some flexibility. Okay? The next one, intentional action to interrupt racism and other types of inequity. Intentional, meaning that it is built in some form or fashion, whether it's policy, procedure. There are mechanisms in place to interrupt racism. There are mechanisms in place to interrupt inequity, period. What will that look like? Not just for now, but also the next 10 years, 20 years, so that it does not continue in the cycle that we've been a part of for so long. Okay, here's one of my favorite ones. Use the democratic process, okay, and systems supported by diverse alliances and partnerships. Allow diverse communities, civic groups, and businesses to be active in the plans that you create. Now, I'm going to be clear. Active means not a representative, but they are regularly connecting with you guys to say, yep, that is in alignment with what we're seeing, or let's negotiate what this can look like given the time that we're in and where we're trying to move into. Representation is one thing. Partnership is another. And we want partnerships. We want sustainable partnerships, so that as we move into the future, these partnerships will continue to inform the actions and the revisions to those actions, so that we are in step with the time, the place, and the context of that environment. So far, so good?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So what I'm going to do is shift this on over to my friend Linda. She's going to talk about interrupting racism, particularly the intersection inequalities, that last part, the last two. Linda, it is on you.
I forgot where the unmute button was. When you think about interrupting racism and inequalities, you want to make sure that you're making space to have conversations about race and how identities intersect. And so that's, tonight is sort of, I think of tonight as a start to that process. And it sounds like when I was listening to all of you report out at the beginning, that you've been doing a lot of that within your group. You also, when you're having conversations with each other, you need to make sure that you have shared agreements. And at the beginning of tonight, Dr. Owens talked about our Brave Space guidelines. And that's kind of what we're talking about when we talk about making agreements with each other, so that you're agreeing that you know that sometimes these are incredibly charged emotional conversations, and that you want to, sometimes you're going to agree that sometimes you might be the one that's going to step back, and that you're going to listen to what other people have to add to the conversation. And that when there is a disagreement, that you have a plan to address that. So I know that with a lot of things at the college, we'll do restorative justice kind of processes where somebody gets to identify a harm that has been done to them. And then we work with them to resolve that harm with the person who inflicted the harm. So it's really important that you develop those agreements within your group, because you're not always going to agree, but you want to set up an environment where you can have conversations with each other so that you can continue to do all this really great work that it sounds like you're doing. I grew up in Charleston. I wasn't born here, but I've lived in Charleston since I was 6, and I'm a little bit older than that now. But when I see the kind of changes in the area, since I graduated from Stall High School back in 1981, it's really phenomenal to see, but also how far we still have to go. And so if you don't establish these agreements with each other, then you're not going to be able to have those conversations that are going to be productive. It doesn't have to be, we talked about challenging with care, and that is so important. When I was doing a little reading earlier this afternoon to prepare for my part of today, and I was looking at some agreements that other people have put together, some folks have adopted the ouch or oh, kind of thing, where if somebody says something that you find hurtful or offensive, that you say ouch, so that they know, oh, maybe I need to think about that. But think about what your agreements are going to be within your groups, and to have a process for when disagreement happens, how you're going to handle that. Exercise humility, which I think Dr. Owens talked a little bit about earlier. If you are doing work, I used to work in the School of Education. So I met all these really wonderful students who wanted to become teachers, which we all know is incredibly hard work. And some of them would come into my office and talk about wanting to save all the children. And so some of the white students were making assumptions about students of color and what they needed even before they were stepping into the schools that they wanted to teach in. And so I think it's really, really important. You acknowledge the authority of BIPOC folks around racism, because they're the authority. I have a story as a woman. Dr. Owens is also a woman, but her story is a lot different than mine because she also is a Black woman. So we maybe identify as the same gender, but our experiences are a lot different. So, and we talk about this personally a lot. And I have to sometimes sit back and listen to her experiences moving through life that are sometimes really hard for me to listen to. But I do, because I want to learn from that. And I think that I have to practice humility a lot in the space that I work in. Next slide. Well, first of all, Dr. Owens, do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, you're good. You're spot on.
All right, you can move on to the next one. So it's really, really important to admit feelings of defensiveness, and I think I'm just I self-identify as white. So I think that sometimes listening to experiences of others that are really, really painful for them is really hard for me because I'm really an empath. So I kind of take on the emotions of others. So I think that when you're part of a conversation and you start feeling that defensiveness come up, and that, there have been lots of times when maybe Sharissa has shared something with me that she's been very, very angry about. And that that is sometimes hard to witness, but I respect that she finds me to be a safe place where she can share those feelings, and that I'm going to listen. So if you need to take a time out, it's really important to do that. And then you make space to reflect and debrief. She talked about a few minutes ago, taking care of yourself, and whatever that means, you know, listening to music, spending time with your children or grandchildren, whatever it is that wherever it is you find joy, you want to look for that. And even if it's taking time for yourself, because it sounds like I'm really excited to see where all of these things I heard all of you talking about in the beginning of the evening. As a resident of the area, I'm really excited to see where all of this goes, and glad to be part of this tonight with all of you. So just remember that you make that space to reflect and then to debrief when you have those really, really hard conversations with each other. Next one. Oh, okay. So are you going to have them post, Sharissa? Oh, hold on. I can't see. Yep. Okay. So in the Padlet link, you can post in there, how are you going to do some of these things? How are you going to, and think about in the work that you're doing right now. And you can pick one, right? Is that okay? Dr. Owens, they can pick one? Or how do you want them to do this in this framework?
Absolutely. So just to let you guys know, I'm giving you guys another Padlet link, and I want you to go ahead and post this Padlet link as far as what Linda was just mentioning. This is going to be a little different. There's no columns or nothing, so it's just going to be like a post to social media or a post to a bulletin board, so to speak. So just simply just type in the text box and press post, right? So I want you guys, as Linda was a little bit before, how would you actually practice these? Okay, how would you set aside the time? How would you practice those shared agreements? How are you going to exercise humility? How are you going to admit feelings of defensiveness and reflect and debrief? I want you guys to start posting these ideas. Once you start posting those ideas, about after 3 minutes, I'm going to put you guys in groups to define, to prioritize which ones you want to start practicing, if not almost immediately. All right, so go ahead, 3 minutes to post. And you guys will be in small groups immediately afterwards. If you are experiencing any problems posting, just let me know in the chat room, or you can just unmute yourself and let me know, and I will try my best to navigate, okay? Or provide.
I'm just not sure. I'm not sure that I'm in a link, the right link. I'm just still seeing the page, time to reflect and post. So.
Okay, so here's what I'll do. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing this, and I'm going to actually share the Padlet screen so that you can see what it should look like. Are you seeing that on your computer screen right now?
Yes, I'm seeing that.
Okay.
So Tracy, you just need to click in that box on the bottom that runs across the bottom that says say something.
All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and start sharing this. I'm going to bring up the presentation again, just so that you guys can see what we are looking for you guys to post. How are you going to practice these? How are you going to practice setting aside a time to discuss race and intersectionality? You may already be doing that in your group. Again, how are you discussing maybe some of the recent events and how that might affect the discussion for the evening, right? Practicing those shared agreements. What agreements are you going to make? What would that look like for your committee? Exercising humility. How would that look like for yourself? How would you admit those feelings of defensiveness in your committee or within for yourself? And how are you going to provide time for yourself as well as your committee members to reflect and debrief? Again, using those stress reduction techniques so that everybody can take good care of themselves doing such challenging work. You guys have approximately another minute. I like the idea of actively listening to one another without interruption, right? So almost kind of like what in restorative justice model, you have a shell or you have an item to use to speak, right? So that it reduces interruption and people get to share what their thoughts are without having to be worried that it's going to be interrupted. But everyone is actively listening. Any others as you guys continue to post for the last 30 seconds?
Whoever posted the that you would like to share agreements for difficult conversation, but you need more training in the area. We could offer some of that. Also, Google is a wonderful resource. You can get some information like that. And then it really is to have a conversation among your group, is that maybe you give each other an assignment where you say, hey, look up some agreements that people are making to have these tough conversations, and to have everybody bring some to a meeting and say, hey, these are the ones I think are important to me. Would everybody be willing to adopt those as an agreement for our conversations? I think it's important to have that group input into that.
Absolutely. It may even be setting aside the last 5 minutes of the meeting to practice some of those stress relieving techniques. It may be the first 5 minutes of the meeting to kind of talk about the environment that we are all in and how that might impact some of the discussion that evening, or the language that we use. You want to start to frame it in a way that it's going to be part of your practice in the work that you're doing with your committees. All right, so what I'm going to do right now is that I am going to open up the floor for any thoughts, comments, or questions regarding what we've covered this evening, but more importantly, of how to practice these best practices in your committees. I was going to move you guys into groups, but unfortunately time has kind of run short, so I'm just going to open it up to the whole group.
This is Gregory.
Yes.
I think the presentation has been great, particularly as it relates to making sure that we have a common understanding of the various concepts such as equality, equity, intersexual, inclusiveness, etc. Most of it has a lot to do with the individual. And when we talk about systemic, we are talking about systems, we're talking about institutions that practice systemic discrimination, for lack of a better term. So how do you go at the institutions, which is a focus of the commission? We want to look at the educational institutions. We want to look at the banking institutions. We want to look at housing. We want to look at economic disparities, health disparities, and I can go on and on. And I clearly understand that you have to take care of the understanding of these concepts personally first before you can move forward to deal with the impact, which can be intentional or unintentional. The impact is still the same. How do we get there in terms of dealing with institutional systemic disparities among groups, and not necessarily racial, sexual? I mean, like all the groups.
Right.
How do we get in there and change that and cut it out? And I'm with you, Dr. Owens. This is not something that's going to happen in 90 days. It's something that's going to happen in years. It's going to literally take years for what we're attempting here.
Right.
And we're all aware of that. But my question is, I'll take care of me. I'll deal with many of the exercises, but how do we get to the systemic practices of racism in our institutions?
Okay, so here is not the way, but it's a way. Does that make sense? It's not the only way, but it's a way. Being in education, my background being in education, a lot of the challenges that our teachers, administrators, and education as a system face is because of the systems, right? When you're working to dismantle a system, you have to look at it in its different parts. You guys are already there with the different subcommittees. Now you need to break those parts down even further into feasible, achievable chunks that you can take on to dismantle in the time that you have. So it may even be a plan of what does this system look like in these different chunks, or what does it look like? I'm just going to use education as an example. When it comes to education, is it the space for the pedagogy that the students, that the teachers are using? Is it the content that the students are learning? Is it the environment? Is it expectation? These are huge, huge challenges. To choose to list out what these are, prioritize, and put a plan that is going to chunk out what those action steps are to dismantle it and over time. This is called a chunking process. Anything that's large and overwhelming, my mother being a part of a sorority said, it's like as large as an elephant, and it's hard to see how are you going to eat this enormous elephant of the systemic problem. The only way to address that is to take small chunks out of that elephant at a time, over time, prioritize. And as you guys already are doing, if you're doing it from different spaces or spheres or fields, you guys are going to work together to chunk to get to that elephant much more quicker. But
you, Dr. Owens, so when you say you concentrate on chunks, okay?
Yeah.
So then you use any enforcement tool that you have in order to help you get rid of that chunk.
Yes.
And what I mean is that there are tons of non-discriminatory laws on the books for everything we're talking about right now. Right. So I think it's very, very important for our subcommittees to be aware of those laws that could help them enforce that chunk.
There you go.
Okay, because if we don't have any kind of enforcement mechanism behind us, it's all for naught.
Very strategic. Well said. You absolutely want to have that bite, so to speak, behind what you're doing. So it may be taking a step back and saying, listen, let's take a look at what these chunks or what these priorities are. Let's find those laws and then use that to literally to drive the action over the next 5, 10, 20 years of what we're doing, right? That is very strategic, it's methodic, and at the same time, you're foreseeing what you're doing for future generations to model and practice as this continues.
Yes.
Yeah.
We're in the same.
And Dr. Owens, I think too, like when I'm thinking about you talking about chunking, is if you look at like this huge global problem and that you don't even know where to start, and then you feel like, well, God, it's just hopeless. Like how are we ever gonna handle it? If you chunk it, maybe you get those things where you see success.
Right.
To move on to the next chunk. When the person at the beginning was reporting out about the signs and the monuments, and she was talking about how huge that was and how many, and well, this is never going to happen in 90 days. It's like, how does she chunk that work so that she gets to do some work that's going to be successful, so that you stay charged and you stay rejuvenated, so that you can continue to work forward, because you can say, oh, well, we were able to do this and this. So now we get to go on and take that next step. Right. And, I know I don't want to take up more of your time, but Dr. Hsu, President Hsu at the College of Charleston, just sent out an email. They're changing the name of a scholarship program at the college. They're changing the name of a building. And now they've created a committee to address more of those kind of issues. So you take steps, and before you know it, you've run a marathon. So, but I love that chunking, and and then you get to see some progress, I think, if you look at it like that. Because if not, I just think the work all of you are trying to do could be incredibly overwhelming.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
You know, it could be incredibly overwhelming.
Tracy, I think you're on mute.
Tracy, you're on mute.
You're muted, Tracy.
I must have, can you hear me now? Okay, I think that when you talk about China, we've talked about the commission as a whole. You know, I've struggled with that in the Housing and Mobility Subcommittee, and Najima, you know, is on my committee. I've had several folks on my committee that are on this call, which I'm really happy about. But so breaking it down, I mean, even within the subcommittee, it's hard to break it down and figure out what the chunks are, because there's so many. We had like 12 or 13 items in our first meeting. So I do think breaking it down into small pieces and making some progress on some of the smaller pieces while we're looking at the larger pieces. And I have to sign off in a minute, but I really appreciated this training, and I am practicing humility every day and learning more. And this has been a great experience for me, but I appreciate your time tonight doing this training.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Yes, absolutely. Again, the work that you're doing is so important. I don't want you guys to wear yourselves out. I don't want you guys to feel like this cannot be done. A way to do this, come up, brainstorm, have a brainstorming session. Like Tracy said, you had about 19 ideas. Now prioritize, and give that priority of your focus. Now it can shift as time moves, right? Life happens, you know, things change, but allow yourself to say, okay, we prioritize, but we may need to shift because now this has come up. You've got to create a system that allows you to, one, prioritize, two, to shift, And three, to plan for a much long term, sustainably, so that you guys will set a model that next generation can take on and then take it to the next level.
And think about
yes.
collective community care. If you haven't heard that term, just how are you caring for each other as a community? Right?
Dr.
That collective community care.
Yeah, I was the one who talked about the very large city marker inventory. And you're exactly right, we are chunking. And I think that I appreciate that terminology, because I think at the last meeting, perhaps the approach that my committee is taking may have been misunderstood. We're certainly not shirking any responsibility to try to make substantive recommendations about removals or relocations. But the fact of the matter is the data set is large. And in order to do justice to the data set, we need not just this subcommittee itself, but a lot of the ideas that came out in the training tonight, I appreciated connecting with other groups that are doing similar work. That's going to be a necessity. And I know as chair of the History and Culture Subcommittee, at this point, I'm envisioning making recommendations that move along that line of community-based work. And also public involvement. I forgot to mention in my report that we are studying the written reports of other cities who have already done this work: Philadelphia, New York, and New Orleans. And we're looking at these reports to gain best practices that we could recommend to our city, what we can do to move this project forward. And I'll end with this. One of the things that's most exciting to me is that in many of these cities, when they're looking at new monument ideas or new installations for public art, they're thinking about things that people can add to over time, so that these pieces become timeless and they move and flow with what is going on in the city at that particular moment in space, and they're representative in a very inclusive way. So I'm excited about what's ahead in terms of what we'll be able to recommend, but I think it is unrealistic to expect that we can bring about the kinds of long-term changes in this short period of time that we know need to happen. We can present the ideas. And I also am very excited, Councilman Gregory, to hear about these laws. I'm not familiar with them. I'd love to have, that meeting where we go over the laws that are applicable to the particular measures that we're trying to achieve. So I'm excited about moving forward. And thank you also, Dr. Owens and Linda Keller, for your expertise tonight. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. We always, sorry. The Zoom issue of talking over people unintentionally, I hate it. We always feel like the conversation starts getting really good, it's time for everybody to part ways, which is always the saddest part of these things for me. Is I really enjoy listening to people process what we've talked about, and to start thinking about like action steps, like things that you can do, things that you can take back to your space and start putting into practice. And thank you all for your contribution tonight. Thank you for having us and hanging around when I know everybody's probably had a long day. I'm wondering, my husband hasn't knocked on the door, so I'm guessing that the election hasn't been called yet.
It hasn't.
It hasn't? Are you sneaking? Are you looking at your phone, Mr.
Yes. One thing I'd really like to say is thanks to the two of you, and to let you know that I think we're maybe 45 days in, but we're 45 days in, which for me is just the beginning of something that hopefully will be a lifelong part of this city. This is just the beginning And what this commission will need in order to be able to implement many of the recommendations from the subcommittee is we're going to have some type of formal entity as a part of this city to make sure that the action plans and the recommendations from the subcommittee has a mechanism to make them real. While we've got this 90-day window, this 90-day window is nothing but a window to give initial kinds of recommendations. This commission will not end in 90 days.
Right.
This commission will be here, hopefully, forever. That's the plan.
You're right. It can be the ground in which that you guys continue to move forward in the city, right?
Yes.
We've held you guys way longer. I thank you guys so much for 90 minutes and so. Have a wonderful night. Thank you for your presence, your voice, and your and your voice. Thank you. Have a great night, you guys.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.